Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Hey, it's me, the Pop Culture Fiend. I am back for part 3 of my audio blog covering the streaming wars. If you didn't hear the first 2 parts, please go back and listen. But I'll just tell you, what I'm covering is the state of the streaming industry, new trends, where the industry is headed. I'm also taking a look at the individual streaming services, what each is offering, the business outlook for each of them, and the long-term prognosis for whether or not they have success in their futures. In my first 2 parts, I covered Amazon Prime Video, Apple Plus, Paramount Plus, and others. And today, I'm going to start off by talking about Hulu. Hulu actually has maybe the most interesting history of any of the streaming services. Both Comcast and Time Warner, which are now competitors, both of those companies actually held stakes in Hulu in the past. But now Hulu is majority owned by Disney. Hulu was very quick out of the gate after Netflix. Netflix, of course, had the DVD by mail business, which eventually evolved into the streaming service. But Hulu appeared on the scene around 2008, about 1 year after Netflix. HBO Max, by comparison, launched just in 2020. So that's a 12-year head start that Hulu had over HBO Max, and yet Hulu only has 41 million subscribers, and that's actually just a little bit less than the amount of subscribers that HBO Max has. So that's not very encouraging, I can imagine, to be in business 12 years ahead of one of your competitors and have virtually the same amount of subscribers. Hulu built its brand around providing next day content from many of the networks. So that continues today. So you can watch shows like Big Sky and Snowfall and Grey's Anatomy and Younger, all of these on Hulu the next day. They also have a number of originals. For example, Summer of Soul, which is a documentary about the Harlem Cultural Festival. Shrill got very good reviews. That's a comedy starring Aidy Bryant from Saturday Night Live. And The United States versus Billie Holiday actually got nominated for a few Oscars. So they do have original content, but Hulu is still primarily a deal-making streamer. And what I mean by that is they rely on partnerships with the TV networks and sports channels like the Big Ten Network and Fox Sports. They also have partnerships with Viacom and Lionsgate and other studios and even rivals. As a result, Hulu is almost more of an entertainment hub than a streaming service, if that makes sense. Because they're sort of aggregating content from all these different sources and then making it available on their streaming service, it is sort of more of a buffet or a hub of entertainment and content. I don't know if that was purposeful or if it just sort of evolved into that. One of the main things that you also need to know about Hulu is they're currently being marketed now as part of a bundle with Disney Plus and ESPN Plus. So Disney, which I mentioned at the beginning, has the controlling stake of Hulu. Disney has made a very, very conscious choice to bundle and market these different streaming services, ESPN Plus, Hulu, and Disney Plus itself. And they want to sell this to you, I believe it's $13.99 for all 3. They're not pushing these platforms individually at all. All of their marketing, all of their advertising, the TV commercials, everything is all about get the Disney bundle. Get the Disney bundle. That's the terminology that they're using. So that's their strategy. Despite this, the growth for Hulu has not been strong. It's been some very, very aggressive marketing by Disney. You see commercials constantly. You see sort of cross-promotional things going on ABC, on ESPN, and in other, Disney-owned properties. You always see the promotion for the Disney bundle. However, it hasn't positively affected Hulu's growth to a large degree. Only 6 million new subscribers since Q3 of 2020, and that's about 9 months. So that is not growth when you compare it. That is not strong growth when you compare it to its rivals. Okay, so now before I wrap up here, because I know it's been a very long listen, but I do want to talk about Roku. So Roku is known for streaming devices, and they also make TVs, but they're probably best known for the Roku stick, I guess it is. You plug it into the TV, and it gives you access to different streaming services. It gives you access to different network applications, so the CBS app, the NBC app, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, it's a way to sort of cord cut and still have linear TV programming, but without having to have cable. And again, it also gives you access to various streaming services. But Roku has been quietly making moves. They've formed partnerships with networks and premium cable channels like Starz and Showtime and Cinemax. And they've even developed the Roku channel. So their own original programming, their own content. You can find everything on the Roku channel from like old 50s and 60s TV sitcoms like Car 54, Where Are You? I mean, is anybody listening who's over the age of 90? You're probably the only one or ever saw.
She ain't what she used to be.
Car 54, Where Are You? Bewitched and Leave It to Beaver. And Roku channel also has movies like The Fugitive and The Outsiders and The Day After Tomorrow. They have a lot of reality TV, LA Inc., Hoarders, Storage Wars. They even have old series from like the 80s and 90s, like News Radio and First and 10. First and 10, not the old ESPN sports talk show, but First and 10, the comedy from the mid 80s that was on HBO, starred O.J. Simpson and Delta Burke. So it really is very, very random what the Roku channel offers. But it's interesting. It's very interesting. So again, Roku has been sort of quietly moving from just sort of being a way to access streaming services and content from other sources. They've been trying to transition into a content provider on their own. So to that end, and this kind of took place, on the DL, but Roku actually bought all of the Quibi content. And Quibi, if you remember, was going to be a new streaming service brought to you by Meg Whitman and Jeffrey Katzenberg. Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was part of Disney and helped, with the resurgence of Disney in the early 90s, and Meg Whitman, the former CEO of Hewlett Packard. They went on this venture to start this Quibi, and Quibi was sort of short for Quick Bites. The whole idea of it was going to be streaming content and original programming that was going to be very, very short. We're talking, 10 minutes or less. And so the idea was that we're in a very, very mobile society right now. And so people would consume this content on their commute, as they're riding the bus or the train, or hey, I'm going on coffee break. I want to watch a couple of things really quick on Quibi. So it was very, very, forward thinking and risky. You could see the logic to it. And Whitman and Katzenberg raised a ton of money for this, and they got top-notch talent for these, different shows. They got top creative to develop these different shows and this different content, but it just didn't work. And they, I don't know if the price point was too high, but it failed almost immediately. It was only around for a couple of months and it failed. So Roku kind of swooped in and bought all of the Quibi content for, I think it was $100 million. And this content cost $1 billion to produce. This was $1 billion worth of content that Roku bought for $100 million after Quibi went under. And so some of the Quibi content, to give you some examples, includes a reboot of Reno 911. There was a reboot of Punk'd, the hidden camera show that had Ashton Kutcher. They rebooted that with Chance the Rapper. There's a show called Dummy with Anna Kendrick. This one's kind of crazy. It's about a sex doll that comes to life and makes friends with the guy's girlfriend. So, and Anna Kendrick, she plays the girlfriend. So, I actually watched that whole series. It's not bad. The writing was pretty smart. And again, but each episode is like 8 minutes long. It's crazy. Anyway, Roku took all of this Quibi content and they rebranded it as Roku Originals. But it's actually just the old Quibi content that never really aired or hardly anyone saw because Quibi failed so quickly. There's another show on there called Wireless, and Steven Soderbergh, I think, executive produced or produced. So there is some quality stuff on the Roku channel. Check it out if you can. But my point is, Roku is doing a nice job of very quietly sneaking up on the competition and positioning themselves as a player in the streaming market. If you take a look at their financial report from Q1 and Q2, you can see that their revenue stream is shifting. The percentage that's attributable to hardware sales is going down, and the percentage of their revenue that is attributable to advertising is going up. And so that is a big indicator that Roku is putting more emphasis and moving towards being a content provider that can charge for the advertising when people come to consume that content. And they're moving away from the hardware, where they're seeing some stiff competition, obviously, from the Amazon Fire Stick and other sources. So this is just Roku just really being smart and again, being sort of sneaky and slowly making moves to make themselves a player in the streaming wars. If you want some more proof, I've got it for you. Roku added 2.4 million accounts in Q1 of 2021, growing the number of accounts on the platform by about 35% year over year. Roku's gross profit grew 132% year over year in Q1. So will Roku use this profitability to invest in growing their platform more and then ultimately emerge as a legit rival to Netflix and HBO Max and the other streamers? I really think it's pointed in that direction. So, yes, with that, I guess we can start to bring this audio blog to a close. There are other streaming services out there. You have Crave, you have BritBox, YouTube Premium, which was formerly known as YouTube Red. But I believe I covered all the real major players. So, who's winning the streaming war? Let's start to wrap up with that question. Well, if I had to pick win, place, and show, I would say that first place right now is Netflix. They, again, had the advantage of being first in the market. I would say in second place right now is Disney Plus. And then in third place, I would say HBO Max. And I believe that one of the things that will support my assessment are the Emmy nominations. The Emmy nominations just came out, and HBO/HBO Max led with 130 Emmy nominations among the streamers. Netflix was second with 129 Emmy nominations. Disney Plus had 71, and Apple Plus had 35. Not that that's a clear indication of who's winning the streaming wars, but it does give you an idea of the quality of the content. And that's a part of it. That's a big part of who's going to come out on top eventually. Okay, one more topic, or maybe not one more, but another topic that I want to discuss with regard to, in this context of the streaming wars is everybody's complaining. Let's call this part of the conversation, everyone's complaining. So we have movie studios and the National Association of Theater Owners, NATO, complaining. They're complaining about the lost revenue that they have from theaters and lack of lack of in-person, customers at their movie venues. They're also complaining about lost revenue from video on demand, which of course has become a much bigger play here because of the pandemic. They're complaining, again, this is the studios and the theater owners. They're complaining about the lost revenue that they've had from pirating. So apparently that has become, pirating has amped up. People are torrenting movies or whatever, and piracy has become a much, more prevalent problem, or has increased at least. And they're complaining also about the password sharing that's taking place within the streaming platforms. So in other words, you lend your Netflix password to a friend or a relative, or your Hulu password, or what have you. And so people are getting content for free. They're getting, access to this content for free. And I guess the studios and theater owners feel like they're not being duly compensated. That revenue is just lost. Who else is complaining? Well, we got the head of AMC, who got into it earlier this year with Universal over the shortened theatrical window that Universal came up with as a pandemic strategy. They decided that, I think it started with Trolls 2, that they were going to severely shorten the theatrical window for Trolls. Typically, the theatrical window has been a couple of months at least, and up to 3 months, I would say, minimum. And so with the pandemic, Universal decided they were just going to do a multi-week, I forgot how many actual weeks it was, but just a shortened window of just a few weeks, and then they were going to take their film right to video on demand, I believe. Well, the head of AMC got into it very, very critical of Universal for this move. And eventually they struck a deal. They kind of met in the middle. Who else is complaining? Christopher Nolan is complaining. He was about to lose his mind when HBO Max decided to go with their same-day release plan that we talked about earlier. He was saying that it was not, it compromised the art, and it was not fair to the filmmakers, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't true to the vision of the art or whatever. And most recently, now you've got Scarlett Johansson is actually suing because she's saying that Disney, with their Marvel, what is it called? Their Premium Plus? Yes, I think it's the Premium Plus strategy, where you can see a film like Cruella. They did this also with Jungle Cruise and Black Widow as well. Scarlett Johansson is saying that reduces the amount of revenue that the film is going to make. It was never part of the original deal that she made. And because it reduces the amount of revenue that the film can make, she's losing out on compensation because she has points. And points are basically just a percentage of, what the film either grosses or nets. Either way, she's out money because you're not making as much money on the streaming platform as you would from someone actually seeing the film in a theater. So that's her whole rationale for the lawsuit. The experts are saying she doesn't have a leg to stand on, that this is really going to be dismissed, that Disney has every right to change the strategy, that in the face of the pandemic, they're justified in changing the strategy, et cetera, et cetera. And there's also apparently some legal, I guess, not loopholes, but there's some legal rights that you have in the face of trying to do the right thing, but just were not able to live up to the terms of the contract due to acts of God and things like that. And so I think the pandemic falls into that category. I don't think that. I'm when I'm talking about this, I'm repeating what the research that I've done and the things that I've heard from the legal experts who are following this case closely. But everyone from Dwayne Johnson and Christopher Nolan, who I mentioned earlier, everyone really in the industry is sort of turned on their ear by this lawsuit by Scarlett Johansson and hoping that she somehow comes out on top because they don't want to lose they don't want to lose revenue. They don't want to make less for making a movie than they've been making. I understand that Christopher Nolan, who's used to getting, $10 million, per picture that he directs, and Dwayne Johnson, who earns about $20 million, I think, every time that he, stars in the film. I'm sure they don't want to take lesser money, and they're looking for ways to, hold these studios and these filmmakers and producers to the same types of deals and the same types of compensation that they've always paid out. But I got news for you as I wrap up this part of the, everyone's complaining section of this audio blog. I got news for you, folks. The landscape is changing. The game is changing. The movie industry is not ever going to be the same as it was pre-COVID. And so everyone's got to get used to a new paradigm. This is exactly what happened in the music industry. If you remember, around the year 2000, when Napster became a big thing, 99, 2000, Sean Fanning and Napster, everybody remember that? People were able to use file sharing programs like Napster and LimeWire and Kazaa to share music with each other. Well, it changed the face of music because now you didn't have to go out and purchase an overpriced CD. You didn't have to go out and buy a whole CD just to get one or two songs that you want from that particular album cut. And so piracy was rampant. And the first thing that the record industry did, music industry, I should say, the first thing they did was they tried to sue the pants off everybody. They were suing, remember Metallica, and was very outspoken about this. They were very, very upset and bitter that they were losing revenue. And so all the music labels, they went out and sued these average people. Their sued parents got sued because their kids were downloading music or sharing music. So that was their strategy. Let's just sue everybody and fight this thing that way. Well, that was never going to work. And what did they finally wind up doing? Well, they adapted, which is what I'm saying that the movie studios are going to have to do now in the face of streaming. But going back to what I was saying before, what the music industry did was they adapted. What did they do? They came up with iTunes, right? Now you had a legal way to get the same content at a fair price, 99 cents per song. Remember that? iTunes eventually evolved into Apple Music that we have today. But that was what happened. That was the rational response. The industry had to change. It was no longer going to be, album sales, CD sales, $16.99 for an album, and you only really like the one song and want the one song, but there's no way to get it because it's not a single. It's not been issued as a single. All of that was remedied. And then, of course, after we got iTunes, we got streaming services for music like Spotify, like Pandora, etc., etc. And that made it even easier. So now streaming is the predominant way that people consume music. And streaming is going to be the predominant way, perhaps, that people consume TV and movies. So stop suing everybody, Scarlett Johansson and all the rest of you, and stop complaining, National Association of Theater Owners and everyone else, and get on the ball and start coming up with a strategy. Get on the ball and start figuring out a way that you can sustain yourselves. It's a new reality, folks. Can't hold back the floodgates on things. It's just the genie's out of the bottle. I know that's a lot of metaphors, but they all apply. All right, well, I think that's going to be it. I'm going to have to sign off now. That was a really, really long 3-part audio blog. I hope that I gave you some good insights on what's happening in the industry and the world of streaming, and hope that you learned a few things about the different streaming platforms and where the industry is headed and trends and things like that. All the things that I said at the top that I was going to cover, I hope that I did a decent job of that. If you want to check out some of my other content, I encourage you to visit popculturefiend.com. There's a lot of interesting articles there, and again, I cover mostly 80s and 90s stuff, but I do talk about contemporary topics like the one I just covered. And also check out my channel on YouTube, The Pop Culture Fiend, and check me out on Twitter at Pop Culture Fiend. It was nice talking to you. I'll see you. Enjoy, and I'm out.
It sound right, boy.